Good day and welcome to this session on request for proposals with dialogue, without negotiation and with consecutive negotiations. By the end of this session, you should be able to explain request for proposals, explain request for proposals with dialogue, and distinguish request for proposal without negotiation from request for proposals with negotiation. So request for proposal is basically another method of procurement, which is mostly used for supply and the provision of service, because in the essence you are expecting that consultants will provide or propose solutions as to how you are going to execute a given task. So ideally, requests for proposals are used to invite consultants to propose means of executing a given service or a needed service. So basically, the procuring entity solicits for proposals from as many suppliers or contractors as practicable, but they must invite or engage at least three, because in the end services are quite delicate, so you cannot evaluate more than like a lot of suppliers at a time. So the ideal number of suppliers that the procuring entity is expected to engage with is 3 minimum or maximum. Requests for proposals can be done with dialogue, it can be done without negotiation, and it can be done with consecutive negotiation, which would be subsequently discussed. So in undertaking requests for proposals under the ancestral model law, you first of all advertise contracts publicly. Then you select at least 3 suppliers. Then the suppliers proceed to submit their proposals. Then you evaluate the proposals based on price and effectiveness of the proposals. Then you engage in discussions with suppliers on the proposals that they have submitted, assuming it's allowed. And then there is a final submission of best and final offers, which covers all aspects of proposals. So considering requests for proposals with dialogue, it involves multiple shortlisted suppliers who are invited to negotiate and submit a best and final offer for further evaluation and final ranking, contract negotiation as well as award. So in this instance, you engage with suppliers as to how to best possibly execute the service, and back and forth negotiations or back and forth discussions are made with these suppliers as to how best to execute the contract. Then in the end, you evaluate and give a final ranking to each of the 3 suppliers. Then you negotiate the contracts and finally award to the successful one. It should be noted that because of the dialogue that takes place in this approach, it is more flexible and competitive, because in the end, suppliers would have to, or consultants will have to come up with the best approach to delivering of the service that is required by the buyer. So request for proposals with dialogue is used when it is not feasible for the procurement entity or the buyer to formulate a detailed description of the subject matter of the procurement. It is also used when the entity seeks to enter into a contract for the purpose of research, experiment, study or development, where you cannot ideally determine the outcome, the procedure or the means for executing any of these. It is also used where it is deemed the most appropriate method of procurement in order to protect national security interests. And requests for proposals with dialogue is finally used when open tendering has been engaged in but has proved unsuccessful. The second method is requests for proposals with consecutive negotiation, which is used when the entity needs to consider the financial aspects of proposals separately and only after completion of examination and evaluation of the technical, qualitative and performance characteristics of the proposal. So the negotiation aspect is used to arrive at a more acceptable price for the buyer, because in the end, after you have proposed the means of executing the service, It comes down to how the costs will be determined. So request for proposals with consecutive negotiation is where you've agreed on how the service will be executed, but it further goes on to include a stage where you will agree on the price that the service will be delivered, and then the procurement entity finally decides on how much they can conclusively undertake the service that they require. And it is also used where the entity determines that consecutive negotiations with suppliers are needed to ensure that the financial terms and conditions of the contract are acceptable to the buyer, such that if they decide to undertake or engage the supplier for the services, will they be able to pay for the services of the supplier or not? It should be noted that the request for proposals with consecutive negotiation is more similar to the two-stage tendering approach. And then in discussing the request for proposals without negotiation, it's usually applicable where the procurement entity needs to examine and evaluate the technical, qualitative, and performance characteristics of the proposals before considering the financial aspects. To effectively use this method, the entity must have well-defined specifications. So in this instance, the entity is not now going to engage consultants or suppliers in drafting of specifications. Then requirements and contract terms as post-tender negotiations are usually not permitted. So you have to know what you want so that in essence you select the lowest possible price, because this method leaves no room for consecutive negotiations. So you've learned about request for proposals with dialogue, and request for proposal without negotiation, as well as request for proposals with negotiations.